Hi, I'm Joe Catanzariti, currently the Chairman of the College of Law, recently retired as Vice President of the Fair Work Commission, and I'm delighted to be here to talk about a few issues involving corporate governance.
Hi, I'm Mark Banicevich. Welcome to Governance Bites, and as you just heard, I have the absolute pleasure of spending time with Joe Catanzariti. Joe, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We've had a few conversations now about various governance topics, and you have an incredible depth of knowledge and experience in this space. Long background as a lawyer, and now, as you say, the chair of the College of Law. And the College of Law is based in New Zealand, Australia, Asia, and the UK, so a large entity. The topic we want to talk about today is why directors should understand the social aspect of environmental, social and governance, ESG. The first question that I've got for you is really to set the scene. What do we mean by social when we're talking about the social aspect of ESG?
When we use the word S in ESG, we're talking about the psychosocial. It's really dealing with something you can't touch or feel, right? Whereas environment and the normal governance issues are very easy to understand. Mm-hmm. It's the underdone part on boards, but interesting enough, it's becoming an increasingly important part. And it's getting the connection between understanding your people, the things that affect them, and making sure that you actually have a productive and healthy workforce. But often, of course, boards don't go anywhere near that. But there have been a whole lot of cases emerging, certainly in the Australian jurisdiction, which are talking about the safe system of work beyond the physical safe system of work.
Right. We're also in social. Are we talking only about the internal people, or are we also talking about the stakeholders and stuff outside?
No, we're talking about the stakeholders as well, because and that includes two types of stakeholders. If you like, your stakeholders being your visitors, that is a traditional stakeholder, and coming in, it could be an independent contractor coming to the premises and engaging in appropriate behaviours, mm-hmm. but also how you are measured by the real stakeholders, the clients and the customers externally to the organisation, and whether you are in fact working effectively as a good organisation in that space.
Right. How is this affecting? Why is this strategically significant for organisations today? And in that, I'm thinking in two areas. How does it influence long-term value, and how does it also influence organisational resilience?
Well, resilience is a very significant statement now, right? I mean. It was in the too hard basket for quite a long time, because people go to work and you expect them to do their job, as distinct from understanding the person, right? Mm-hmm. And by analogy, yesterday one of the boards I'm involved in is the Arise Foundation, which deals with domestic violence. And yesterday we had a function involving a number of survivors from domestic violence, and one of the things they talked about was their experience in the workplace. The ability of an employer to understand the whole person, mm-hmm. right? And quite often, if you've got a cut on a finger, everybody understands that. But if you've got other issues, whether it be somebody who's got some domestic violence, or there have been other behaviours that have affected you that affect ultimately your resilience, your ability to work, the understanding of the organisation to actually deal with it, and it will, if they do it properly, of course, you'll be able to perform much better in the workplace, because there'll be an accommodation made to understand you as the whole person, right? Mm-hmm. And quite often areas which deal with the psychosocial, the HR departments, unfortunately, find it quite difficult and challenging, right? Because it's not an easy thing to go into, right? But on the other hand, if they try to avoid it, right, an employee assistance program, for example, is not the answer to these questions, right? And boards are, boards are often just given a standard, OC health and safety report saying, no incidents, right? Yes. But that's what's looking at really on a factory line. Has there been anybody with a cut finger, right? Yes. They're not really going into, the health and safety. And so then you look at what are the indicators that board directors could be asking for. And here we turn to things like, staff turnover, right? Mm-hmm. Is a really good indicator of, what's actually happening in your organisation. Senior leadership departures, right? The board doesn't normally get a lot of access about that, certainly in boards that I've been involved in, probably because I do have a HR employment background, I like to ask those questions. And I certainly think, at the most senior level, the top 10 or 15 executives, every time they depart, the board needs to understand a why question, right?
Yes.
And challenge that, right? Because particularly if you see, long-term people leaving, right? Is there, potentially there can be a bullying situation that is occurring.
Yes.
And as a lawyer who investigated a number of these matters over many years before I got appointed to the Fair Work Commission, it was very interesting when I would be retained by boards, as distinct from CEOs, and they'd say, look, we just need a second look at something, right? Mm-hmm. And the psychosocial does include things like sexual harassment and discrimination. And I remember cases where, a person on their way out, right, complained about sexual harassment and said, but I don't want to do anything about it, I'm just letting you know. And the board was apprised of that complaint, and the board specifically instructed me to conduct an investigation, right? And that opened 5 other people, right, mm-hmm. who had not felt they had a voice, right? Because unfortunately, in a number of these situations, the people involved are very powerful, mm-hmm. right? And there is a growing awareness that it's not okay in all these behaviours, and the S, is really important. But there are a number of people who don't value it at all, and they just think, well, it's a given that everybody understands what S is, and as distinct from understanding, it's actually a lot more than a word. Mm-hmm. It's more than policies, right? You can have the best policies in the world and still have disastrous behaviours occurring at your workplace. Right.
Ultimately, organisations are groups of people, and in this internal view that you're talking about, it's very much about the wellness of those people, because if the people are broadly well, then you'd expect the organisation to be functioning better. So culture will be a big part of this as well. The organisational culture will be a major element. Right. What risks do board face when they you've probably alluded to some of these already. You may have a separate example. What risks do board face when they misunderstand and minimise the importance of the social element?
We now have obviously in various jurisdictions equivalents of work cover, the like, mm-hmm. who can go into organisations and prosecute companies now for an unsafe system of work.
Yes.
They can also intervene. For example, there was a recent situation where failure to consult in relation to a restructure can actually trigger a health and safety issue, right? Mm-hmm. As well, that it can be paused by the regulator, because there's a whole wellbeing piece about these sort of things. It's not simply going in and doing something. If you have enterprise agreements that talk about consultation, and there's a failure to consult, it can have an impact negatively on various people. Mm-hmm. As we deal with more and more employee rights being embedded, so for example, working from home, right, which is obviously post-COVID, there's a lot more working from home, right?
Yes.
And how does an employer deal with working from home issues and the accommodations in relation to working from home, and ensuring that there are no risks, right? Mm-hmm. So and really just having an open dialogue. It does mean that senior management can't just outsource everything to HR.
No,
they've got to be managing people and understanding their people, but at the same time, for our purposes, the board and the directors have to understand what is going on.
Yes,
they have to be satisfied that there are policies, and policies is only the first step. Then there's got to be training, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's got to be refreshers, right? More and more organisations are doing surveys of their people regularly, right?
Yes.
And quite often, of course, those surveys are not making the board, right? Now, I don't understand that myself, based on my experience. It's pretty important for those surveys to go from the CEO to the board, mm-hmm. because that's when the board has an opportunity to say, well, last year our satisfaction of our staff was X, and these issues were emerging. They talked about how we comply with culture, the values of the organisation, and there's been a drop. Well, if the board's not given the data, they can't challenge, right? So, the CEO is not a block on the S. they've got to be an enabler, right?
Yes.
But the boards have to ask the questions.
So on that note, what sort of reporting would you want as a chair, for example, or as a board? What reporting would you want from the CEO on these sorts of factors so that you can ask the right questions?
Well, I like to have it as a regular board item, right? So it's not something that just comes up every quarter for, give us something on it. So I want to know, have there been, the same way we would deal with, these days cyber, because cyber is absolutely panic, right? The board needs to know about, has there been the slightest cyber breach, right?
Yes.
Why are we putting that at that level so high, and the social and the psycho issues that are occurring in the workplace not as high, right?
Yes.
I mean, in one sense, the cyber issue has a solution. It's the reason it's so important is because there's reputational damage and all the rest of it. But boards have to understand there's a significant reputational damage that occurs in relation to something going wrong.
Yes.
Right? What I don't want to read as a chair is the newspaper article about a particular board, that if I was involved in it, says, an investigation occurred into X, the board did Y, and then the board ultimately changed their mind in relation to the issue because they found out more, they didn't deal with it properly, because they weren't asking the right questions. And it's not about the board backing an individual, because it's not the way it works.
Yeah.
Boards should deal with facts, right? And they should be asking the questions and empowering, if you like. It doesn't mean, a board of 10, they're all asking questions, because not everybody has the skill set to ask the right questions, right? I mean, it's not, some board directors are really good on the money, right? And some are much better on the people side. So that you get a diverse board, and you empower the various directors to probe those questions and often take, sometimes questions offline, right? So you don't have to have everything in the board meeting, but you want to be satisfied that you've got good systems in place, regular updating to the board, things like staff turnover, knowing if there are complaints that have been lodged, whether they be bullying, whether they be harassment, whether there be issues of, resilience training, I think is really important now, right?
Yes.
There are often criticisms in relation to employment assistance programs and whistleblowing protections, and these are, the board ultimately can be, in serious trouble if they're not dealing with these issues. So, I mean, we've come a long way from, say, 30 or 40 years ago, where board directors, effectively, it was a rite of passage, a cup of tea, and you're a board director, right? It's a really serious job being a director.
Yes.
And that applies, just as much to, stock exchange listed companies, to charities and not-for-profits. It's quite onerous, albeit that the remuneration is quite different between the groups, right? But once you are in the director space, you have to keep on top of all these issues. And, board training, which didn't occur much in the past, actual training of directors, right? Ongoing training, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you might get, a qualification, base qualification, but directors need to be encouraged, right, to continually be doing training.
Yes.
And certainly in the ESG space, there is now recognised that you need to have training on that, right? So even at the College of Law, we established, to train, we got an ESG centre, right? And that's available to everybody, because we acknowledge that it's not just about our lawyers who are part of our cohort, but everybody at large needs to understand how these things work.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Now, you talked before about the power of the regulator, and you're based in Sydney, but the College of Law and you as group chair, you have responsibility around the New Zealand entity, the Australian entity, the UK entity, and the Asian entities as well. Are there any differences that you see in the power of the regulator, and how much influence does that have on the...
There are certainly significant differences around the jurisdictions, right?
Yes.
Some obviously, and the UK is quite an interesting jurisdiction, because it requires boards to understand the, particularly educational institutions, about the potential of, students engaging, being controlled by what I call loosely like terrorist groups, or, the student becoming radicalised. So one of the requirements of directors in the UK, right, for example, like us, is continuously we have to have that sort of training as well, right? So that we're alive to that, so that the signs can be checked, because they all go into the psychosocial issue, right? And so it's not just simply, somebody having a bad day at the office, right? Or whatever. It's a continuous awareness. And the discussion between management and the board at board meetings on those issues becomes important. Now, Australia hasn't got to that level, and I don't think New Zealand has in relation to that sort of detailed training, but I think it's a good thing, right? Certainly, I think most boards now would acknowledge that sexual harassment training, anti-bullying training, right, discrimination in its broadest sense are messaged, right? And it's not an assumption that people know what because sometimes the discrimination is indirect, right? And it can be as simple as, the interview processes in the organisation are not rigorous enough, right?
Yes.
And how interviews are put together, right?
What is the specialist knowledge that's required to sit somewhere on the board to be able to handle these issues well? And how much should the rest of the board have some foundational knowledge so that you're not relying on this one person and saying, oh, that's your job,
Right. I think it's in two parts, right? So all directors, and this may be controversial, right, but I think all directors should have periodic module training, if not face-to-face training, for the baseline knowledge, right? And that would be, as I encourage, sexual harassment training, anti-bullying training, at the very least, right? On a regular basis, and it can be done by way of modules, but the modules that are done are interactive, so that in fact there are questions that the director is answering. And it's not about trapping them, right? So yes. Because those modules assist you to actually, if you're not sure about an answer, it assists you how to understand the question. So you by visuals of that, it's really good to have that sort of messaging. That's your baseline. Now, I would hope that in the depth of a board, there are one or two directors who are known to actually, have deep knowledge of these issues. And they might have, HR backgrounds extensively in their previous lives, or HR employment law backgrounds, and they are asking more of the subtle questions, if you like, and so they're calling for more data regularly, right? So they'll be the ones, more broadly asking questions about staff turnover more regularly. They'll be spending their time wanting to look at a staff survey, right?
Yes.
Right, and looking at the deviations of staff surveys, or if there are no staff surveys, they might say, well, why aren't we actually doing health checks on our organisation, right? They'll want to talk about exit interviews, right? Again, that's granularity, which not every director has the time or the capacity to deal with, but you have an audit and risk committee, within that you would identify the person who might want to be having the focus on that to bring back to the main board issues in relation to that.
How do you, if you've got one person that has that expertise at asking these questions, how do you ensure that that person doesn't by default become the owner of this topic, and that all other directors then get involved in those conversations? Yeah,
and that's a very good point, right? And that person must share their information and not dictate, right? So if I was in that role, given my background, I might present to the board and say, look, this is an issue that's arisen, and all directors should be engaged, particularly with an issue. If it's a clean bill on something, then one hopes it's okay, right? But if there is an issue, it can't just be put to the side, right? I mean, quite often you hear about employment litigation, right? Not even getting to the board, right? Now I find that problematic, right?
Yes, very much so.
And I in fact, I'd have to say I see that a lot, where because and particularly when I was in practice, and even I should say at the Fair Work Commission, I would often ask the question, right, and say, well, this is pretty serious. In some cases, I'd have to say even the CEO wasn't aware of it, right?
Wow.
So it was kept at manager level away, right? Because to me, any potential or actual litigation, the board needs to, particularly about actual litigation coming, the board needs to have a view, right?
And that is definitely a symptom of some deeper problems if you get to the litigation stage.
And some of these might in fact be group problems, not just an individual case, right? And we saw there might be a particular strategy that management's design which ends up being challenged legally, right, in terms of the HR side. Well, that challenge the board needs to understand what lies ahead.
Yes. No, what competitive advantages have you seen of organisations that have actually done this really well?
Well, they become a great place to work, and it's all about brand and your reputation, right? I mean, nothing beats the word of mouth, and you can very quickly destroy the company's well-being for a long time because people think, oh, that was that company that had that issue involving that cover-up on that HR issue.
Yes.
Right? And there are many examples where, in my community, of course, people talk about those things and say, well, how could that have actually happened, right? And there is, this goes to a whole process question of really also about how you investigate an issue, right? Right. Now, I've said this for many years, that it's difficult in a lot of cases to do internal investigations, particularly when we're talking about power.
Yes.
Right. So it's one thing if it might be, a person, of equal levels being investigated, and you might do a preliminary investigation, right? But when you're talking about a complaint from a subordinate to a manager, right?
Yes.
And then internally it's investigated. I can't tell you the number of times when I've been brought in and an opposite result occurs, because obviously I've got the ability to ask different questions, right? And there's a tendency to back in a senior person over a junior person, right? And there are numerous examples where it just wasn't right. And a number of times I was called in by either the corporate counsel or others to say, well, we're just a bit uneasy about this investigation. Can you just have a closer look at it? And then you find, as you drill down, and in a number of cases you also get the admission, because they're not saying internally, they're not prepared to say, which is strange to accept, but it's true, and then externally they're prepared to say it. And even in the commission period, there were a number of times when there was an internal investigation, clean bill of health, right, by the internal investigation, and then in the commission environment, in the mediation part, let alone the hearing part, you would have the party who's been, suggest they engage, have say, well, just by the way, I actually did do it, right? It's not a gotcha moment. It's just they've realised the path is now going in a particular way.
Right.
So, and investigators, both internal and external, often use inappropriate language in their reports by saying not substantiated when it's actually substantiated, but they don't just have the evidence. So what they should be saying, in effect, is not, it's like if it's substantiated, that's clear.
Yes.
But in a lot of cases, it's you and I having a conversation, no witnesses. The answer is not substantiated is wrong.
Right.
All it means is I, as an investigator, am unable to say, but it doesn't mean it's not substantiated.
No.
It's just it doesn't go that far, right? And there might be other material, but investigator is able to sort of weigh up the whole lot, right?
Yes.
And as having done so many investigations over many years, right, you are able to sort of form a view in the pattern. So, but I would never use the word not substantiated unless I meant it didn't happen.
It hadn't been verified.
It hadn't been verified, right? So I'd rather say, on the balanced probabilities, I am of the view that this incident did not happen this way, right?
Yes.
It's a definitive view, and that's what ultimately that court outside of a criminal jurisdiction is going to form that standard. They're not going to say not substantiated, right? And then if it is substantiated, yes, it is, right?
Yes. Yeah, right. I know that in New Zealand we've got a Whistleblowers Act that I believe boards will often have a whistleblowing officer.
Yes. Yep.
That staff can call independently. One question for you, I just to wrap things up, because I know you've got a busy day ahead of you. What is the best advice that you've received as a director?
The best advice? Well, there's different types of advice, right? As a chair, the advice I've received is different to as a director. Right?
Yes, okay, I'm happy to receive both.
So as a chair, the best advice and the advice that I follow is the chair should not be expressing their opinions on an issue at the outset, right? In other words, the role of the chair is to acknowledge the strength of the whole, right? So I might have a view on an issue A, right? But I would always invite the directors to form their views and encourage the discussion. And then I'm able to say either I agree or don't agree. That's a different point, right?
Yes.
But you've allowed the discussions to occur, right? It's really important that the directors are given a full voice, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and there's a lot of commentary about aggressive chairs, yes people, no voice. Well, you're all directors, right? I mean, it's really important. If you're a director, you don't get a get off jail card because you didn't say anything, right? And similarly, if you're the chair, you're not protected by your own actions that way, right? Because they look at the board and what's happened, right? And if you don't agree with a proposition, then you should say so.
Yes.
Right? Now, in terms of the director side, the best advice I've obviously had has been, particularly, I guess, I'll break this down a bit. Right? If you're a new director, right, when I use the word new, I don't mean new in the sense of today, but you might only been there for a year, right?
Yes.
There is an early tendency of a new director to feel like they're just absorbing and not talking, right, at all, right? That has a risk, because if you are concerned about an issue, you ought to raise it, right?
Yes.
Right? And my view is that no question by a director is a silly question,
No.
right? They are directors. If they want to ask a question, you might, as chair, you might go, oh no, they're really asking that question. Let it ask, right? Because it might elucidate something else, right? And and I've been in the role of advising boards and also on boards, and I think it is important that every director, if they wish to talk on a topic, you don't, and it's a reverse question, because you should not talk on every topic. That's the other advice I'd give you, right? So you don't, as a director, need to, on every single issue, articulate, because you might be in agreement. If you're in agreement, then you just...
There's no point repeating it.
But when you do have something that is issuing, or you want to seek clarification, right, or you want management to present something, etc. Now, the other advice, and I'll wrap up on this really, is, and this is more in the director space than the chair, sometimes directors forget that they're not management, right? And that's where the chair has to really get involved, either in the board meeting or subsequently. You can't have directors demanding of the executives to go away and do something, right? Just not right, right? And I've seen that over the years where, it's embarrassing really when that happens, because, the very thing you've asked them may be something that really shouldn't be happening anyway, right? And the chairs need to, either at the meeting or shortly thereafter, step in to say, well, actually, that request is not a legitimate request. Being a director does not mean you have a free-for-all, right? It's got to be focused on your role as a director.
Yes, and the previous point that you were making about asking questions, one point I would add to that from our conversation earlier was, as long as you're prepared.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
So prepare for the board meeting, and if you've read all the papers,
that's true.
then ask any questions.
That's right. You must read the papers.
Yes.
Now, if you have a view, because I've heard this said as well, that you're swamped with board papers by the executive, right? In terms of a lot of unnecessary materials coming to the board, then that's as a director, I would request to meet with the chair, right? Without management, right?
Yes.
And have a conversation about that and say, look, we seem to be getting a lot of papers, which seems good in one sense, but when you drill down, there's a lot of padding here, right? And I've done that before as well, right?
Yes.
Because you work through the chair, right? Not in the room, right? And say, look, don't give us all these papers if they're not for a purpose, right?
Yes.
Because that's not, there's two, you get two slim papers where there's nothing in them, and you say that's a problem.
Yes.
But you can be swamped with a lot of papers, and it's no different to judges in a courtroom saying, why have I got so many pages, right? Give us what we should really get that is relevant,
Yes.
right? Because the board is not judging the management team on the number of pages. Right?
No. Joe, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Enjoy catching up with you. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next episode. Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favourite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.